Okay. All your feet.
Okay, so who was here last week when we did this? Yeah? Okay, a few. So what we did last week, basically, we spent about an hour. We spent a half an hour explaining what this book is, and the other half an hour doing an actual learning session from it. So I'm not going to do that every week, obviously. So you'll I'm sure you'll figure it out as we're going along. And if you need further explanation, find someone who was here last week and ask them to explain it to you, or you can just go online to openbook.press, and there's a presentation there that explains what this Chumash is. I mean, it's basically a Chumash with commentary, but there's certain unique features that it has, which makes it a very interesting learning exercise. It's the approach to learning Chumash, learning the Parasha, or just learning the Bible, or whatever you want to call it, in a way that's drawing from a great variety of different angles, different perspectives, from very different people who lived across 3,000 years, 100 generations, every part of the globe, every discipline or philosophy, different styles, different approaches, and just basically not trying to shoehorn everything into one philosophy or one approach, but to sort of get the whole the multifaceted view of Torah, seeing how all these different things stem from Torah, and then within that whole varied and perhaps even chaotic medley of ideas, to sort of find your path and find what resonates with you and what you identify with and what you want to learn. So we can basically open it to any page in the book or any page in the Parsha and start exploring, because essentially we have here a great variety of insights and views on virtually every single passage and every single narrative in the Torah. We'll start, and what this session really is basically sort of like a sample learning session to give a taste of what it's like to be studying Torah in this particular way or this particular approach, which might be different from other ways that you're used to studying Torah, which is usually a rabbi or a lecturer or a teacher or a professor or someone comes and has a certain angle, a certain perspective, and you're basically getting the whole story from that vantage point. So we'll start with, in the book, it's page 330. It's the beginning of chapter 29. It's essentially, it's like not literally the beginning of the Parsha, but a little bit, it's the beginning of Sheni, the beginning of the second reading. Even though the first reading is also very fascinating, you have the story of Yaakov's dream and the ladder, and we have here, if you want, you can have a look at pages 324 and 325, and you have over there 15 different explanations of what Yaakov's ladder actually represents. It's a fascinating, a lot of art and a lot of paintings and a lot of commentary, of course, a lot of ink has been used to try to tackle this idea. Yaakov has this dream, he sees a ladder, angels going up and down, and it's of course a very fascinating model, a very fascinating image, that there's so many different elements, so many different interpretations that you can give to this dream. I mean, obviously it's a dream, so a dream is right there, lends itself to many different kinds of interpretations. But the reason why I picked to start with Sheni, with the second reading, is because most Parsha classes start with the beginning of the Parsha, so that's sort of a little bit old hat. And if you open up your typical Chumash, you're going to find like at least 50% of the commentary of each Parsha is on the first few pages of the Parsha, because that's when, that's the most studied part. So I thought it would be a nice change of scenery to start in the middle of the Parsha. Since we're not going to cover the whole Parsha anyway today, we'll maybe cover a few verses, so we might as well just start anywhere. So this basically picks up the story of what happens with Yaakov after he runs away from Beersheba, from where after the whole scene of last week's Pasha, where he steals the blessings, and then he has his dream on Mount Moriah, what's known today as the Temple Mount, and he has this dream of the ladder, and he makes this vow, which all are very, very deep ideas. But now he's finally ready to continue on, and he's coming to Haran. He was sent to Haran by his mother, and he's sent to Haran by his father. So he has two missions, basically. If you remember, those of you who studied last week's Parsha, in the end of Parshas Toldos, his mother tells him, run away to Haran, because Esav is planning to kill you. You got to lay low. You got to hide out over there. And go there and stay there a few days. Yamim Achadim, that's what he says, a few days. Those few days end up being 20 years, by the way. And I'll summon you. I'll call you when things are calmed down and things are safe, when your brother has calmed down a little bit and he's no longer plotting to kill you. But of course, she has to explain the whole situation to Yitzchak, and she can't tell him that story, for obvious reasons. So she comes up with a whole thing, we have an old bachelor in the house. He needs a shidduch, it's time for him to get married. You got a very nice wife, myself, from Haran. That's a good place to find a wife. Your father insisted that you get a wife from Haran. We don't want the Canaanite girls. We don't like them. So I'm going to why don't we send Yaakov to Haran? And Yitzchak says, great idea. And he summons Yaakov, and he gives him a blessing, and he sends him to Haran. He says, go to Haran and find yourself a wife in Haran from your mother's family. So Yaakov is going, and he has two missions. One mission from his mother, one mission from his father. And he's actually on both these missions simultaneously, which is going to end up being two threads in the entire story. So what happens, what I'm going to do is I'm going to read the text, and then we'll read some of the commentaries. So we'll read the text. Vayeitzei Yaakov Raglov Vayelech Artza B'nei Kedem. This is chapter 29, verse 1. Yaakov lifted his feet, and he went to the land of the people of the east. So, of course, Haran, which is today southern Turkey, northern Syria, would be somewhere around there. If you look on the map, there actually is a map here somewhere in the book. That's east of the land of Israel. He's coming from Beersheba and from Jerusalem, so he's going to the land of the people of the east. But right away we have over here two very interesting commentaries. What does it mean, Yaakov lifted his feet? It's an interesting expression, and of course whenever there's an interesting expression in the Torah, right away you have commentary on it. So the first commentary is actually it originates in Midrash Rabbah. Midrash Rabbah, what I'm going to be doing, and this is what we did last week, is anytime we quote a commentary, we can give you a little bit of the background of who this commentary is. So Midrash Rabbah is a collection of teachings from the Talmudic sages. It's sort of a parallel work to the Talmud. You would say it's like the remainders of the Talmud in a way. It's like stuff that didn't make it into the Talmud ends up in Midrash Rabbah. It's usually actually the more interesting stuff sometimes. And this was actually composed in the land of Israel, in the Holy Land, so it would be parallel to what we would call today the Jerusalem Talmud. And there are actually a few hundred different sages that are quoted in the Midrash Rabbah. And one of them is Rav Acha. Rav Acha is quoted also in the Talmud often. I believe he lived in the 3rd century CE, which would be around 1800 years ago, 17 or 1800 years ago. And that's the original source of this commentary. And then it's also cited by Rashi. Rashi is the very famous running commentary, probably the most used commentary on Torah. If you're going to learn Torah with any commentary, it's going to be Chumash with Rashi. Rashi lived in the 11th century. He was born in 1040. He passed away in 1105. So that's going back almost 1,000 years ago, 900 years ago plus. And he was basically one of the fathers, or one of the early figures of what we know today as Ashkenazic Jewry, when Jews during the late years of the Roman Empire settled in the Rhine Valley, which is basically overlapping France and Germany. They developed a very thriving, influential Jewish community there, and that's basically the cradle Ashkenaz, what we know as Ashkenazic Jewry, which I don't know if that's the case today, but definitely until 100 years ago was the overwhelming majority of the Jewish population in the world. And they have the unique customs of Ashkenazic Jewry. Yiddish is, of course, the founded by Ashkenazic Jewry, and so on. So that's those. And Rashi, a large part of his commentary is actually drawn from the Talmud and from the Midrashim. He didn't believe so much in making up ideas. He was more focused on taking from the traditional teachings of the sages and drawing them into his commentary, but he does it in a very creative way. He's actually very selective of what he quotes and how he quotes it, and sometimes he edits it a little bit and paraphrases it and combines different teachings in a way that's actually pretty original. So it's wrong to say that Rashi is just a collection of midrashim and passages from the Talmud, but on a technical level, you can probably find 90% of everything that Rashi says in an earlier source. So what is this commentary? It is written, the heart heals the flesh. The heart heals the flesh is a very deep psychological insight, which says, today obviously it's very much recognized that if someone's having a physical ailment, a lot of times there's a psychological or there's an emotional component to it or an origin to it. And if your heart, if your psyche, your mental health and your state of being, when you're depressed, God forbid, you're going to have a million different physical problems as well, and vice versa. When you're in a joyous mood and in a positive mood, optimistic mood, that rejuvenates your physical body as well. It's not like, okay, the physical body is just a machine that functions based on, whether it has enough oil and lubrication and gas and whatever, but it's actually very much married to and very much hinging on the emotional state of a person. So that's what it means, the heart heals the flesh. Or, as the saying goes, the Baruch is offering another version of this saying, the stomach carries the feet. Sound familiar? Supposedly, this is attributed actually to Napoleon. Napoleon is supposed to have said an army marches on its stomach. But this, interestingly enough, even though most places you'll find it quoted from Napoleon, it was actually said about 1800 years before Napoleon or 1600 years before Napoleon, by Rav Achen Medrash Rabbah. The stomach carries the feet. In other words, what's happening in your belly and your gut is determining your feet. So that's what it means. What does it mean Yaakov lifted his feet? Yaakov walked. No, Yaakov, when Yaakov heard the good news, God promised to protect him. The previous sukkim we read about the amazing promises he gets from God, the dream that he has and what God promises him in the dream. His heart lifted his feet and it became easy for him to walk. Suddenly, he's with a lighter step. He's in a good mood. He's optimistic. Before that, he had a lot of room for pessimism. He's running for his life. He's penniless. We know on the way he was actually robbed. The end of last week's Parasha is a midrash about it. We're going to encounter that midrash a little bit later, if we get that far. So he had, so he's going. He's supposedly going to Haran to find a match. He left his father's house equipped with wealth. Now he's penniless. Eliphaz, his nephew, robbed him on the way, and he had nothing, and he's afraid for his life, and he's all alone, and he's away from home and everything. It was a very depressing situation, objectively speaking. And now, after having this experience in Mount Moriah, he's suddenly rejuvenated. He's all joyous, and his heart, he lifted his feet. Okay? That's the commentary from Rav Acha and Medrash Rabbah and Rashi. Now we have another commentary from Rabbi Zaria Figo. Who is Rabbi Zaria Figo? So if you think I remember everything that's in this book, I don't. But thankfully we have in the back, we have a full listing of everyone in the book. Rabbi Zaria Figo is obviously a much more recent figure than Rashi. Zaria Figo. So we have in the back of this book, we actually have what's called an Encyclopedia of Sages and Source Text, which gives a short description of every single every single source mentioned in this book, so you can get not just who he was and when he lived, but actually the context, like who his teachers were, like what is he a Kabbalist? Is he a philosopher? Is he someone who's more a halachist, that's into more the legal side of Torah? Is he someone who's a pulpit rabbi? Did he have many students? Is he an unknown person? There's a lot of sometimes when we saw last week, actually, those who were here, when you get the background of who this person is, it gives you a very interesting thing. So it's actually, Isaiah figure was on page 662. He was born in 1579, passed away in 1647, so it means he lived about 400 years ago in Italy, okay, in Pisa and Venice. And he was a very popular preacher. There's a work called Bina Leitim, which contains 75 of his sermons. And essentially, the most fascinating thing about him, he has many intricate legal works, Talmudic works, that he had to do completely from memory, because he lived in a time shortly after, in Italy and all the papal states, there were the burning of the Talmud, there was the burning, and Jews basically were almost without books. You had situations in which maybe the city had one copy of the Talmud for the whole city, and maybe not even that. Maybe the nearest copy of the Talmud would be 3 cities away. And nevertheless, there were Jews who produced amazing works of genius, all from memory, all from what they learned in their youth, from teachers who had memorized all of this and passed it along, and with a very scant ability. We're not a situation where you can walk into a library as we could today and see thousands and thousands of works of Jewish scholarship and use that for your research and use that for your way of composing what you want to accomplish. He nevertheless was able to produce some very original and very intricate works in all areas of Torah. So he says he sees a deeper idea in this idea that Yaakov lifted his feet. He says like this: there are people who allow their feet to carry them wherever their feet are wont to wander. But the righteous carry their feet. They decide where they want to go and take their feet there. So are you in charge of your life? Are you a person who decides where you want to go and then direct all your different faculties, whether it's your feet or whether it's your mind or whether it's your heart or whether it's any other part of yourself, but you set the tone, you decide, you are the master of your own fate, you are the master of your own life, you decide where you want to go, and you direct your body and your psychology and your mind and all the other parts of yourself to that place? Or are you led by that? So a lot of people are led by others, passive people are led by other people, but sometimes we could be led by ourselves in a negative way as well. In other words, we just allow our own habits, and we think we're independent people because, well, it's my decision, I wanted to go there, but I didn't want to go there, my feet wanted to go there. In other words, my habit. It's my indoctrinated habit. This is what I've been doing for 50 years, so this is what I'm going to do tomorrow also. So it's not, you're not really taking charge of your life. And this is what's unique about Yaakov. In everything that Yaakov is doing, even though if you look at Yaakov's life and his biography, he was of all the 3 patriarchs, and not just the 3 patriarchs, probably of all the characters in the entire Chumash, he was the one who you could say, if you're looking at it in an objective way, is probably the most passive character. What I mean by the most passive character? So much was dictated to him by circumstances beyond his control. When Yosef was kidnapped, was lost to him, when he had to go down to Egypt, when he was subject to Lavan, when Lavan was manipulating him, when he was running away from Esav, when he's dealing with Shechem, it's his entire life. He's constantly battling forces that are so much more powerful than himself. And I don't think you can find a single equivalent case in the entire Bible, the entire Tanakh, of a person who is so much supposedly at the mercy of his circumstances as Yaakov. But he's not a passive person, not at all. He is always the one who in every situation finds the way to take charge of his life and run with it and make it go where he's headed for. He knows where he's headed. He knows where he wants to go, and he does it. And that's why Yaakov, and his other name is Israel, that's our role model. That's who we are. We call ourselves Jews, even though we have Avraham is our ancestor, and Yitzchak is our ancestor, and Moshe gave us the Torah, and King David gave us the land of Israel, and Yeshua, and there's so many amazing heroes or figures in our history that influenced us so much, but we don't name ourselves after any of them. We name ourselves Israel. We name ourselves Yaakov. Why? Because this is the story of the Jewish people as well. The story of Jewish people, there's no people that was as subject to the whims of history as the Jews were, completely tossed around, completely subjugated from all directions, and at the same time, we're masters of our own destiny. We refuse to give in to that. We refuse to bow to that, and we persist in heading in the direction where we want to go. And to Rabbi Zaria Figo, who, as we saw in his own life, knew exactly what we're talking about here in many, many, many ways. To be a Jew in the Middle Ages, in the 1700s, in a Catholic country, where even your right to own your own books, to own the wisdom of your ancestors, was punishable by death. It's amazing. There are today volumes of Talmud that survived, that still exist today from that era, when actually owning a volume of Talmud was a capital crime. If the agents of the church walked into your house and they found the Talmud there, the Talmud was burnt and you were burnt. That's what life was for Jews in those times. And nevertheless, they studied Talmud and they wrote books on the Talmud, and they did all that. And therefore, it's extremely poignant to see how he understands Yaakov lifted his feet. His feet didn't carry him. He carried his feet. Okay, so he arrives in the land of the people of the East. We don't know yet what this country is called. So far, that's all it's called. We'll find out soon where he is. And what does he see? He sees an interesting scene. He saw, and here is a well in the field. He comes upon the scene. There's a well. There's a big field, and in the middle of the field is a well. And here, 3 herds of flocks are there, crouching upon it. So you have 3 herds of sheep or goats, flocks. Flocks can mean sheep or goats. 3 different flocks, which means they're actually under the care of 3 different shepherds. And they're all sitting there, just lying on the ground around this well. What are they doing there? Why are all these 3 different flocks all just lying on the ground around this well? As from that well, they give drink the herds. This is the only well. This is it was a land with scarce supply of water. And this is the well. This is the well from which they're going to get the water. So why aren't they drinking water? And the stone is large on the mouth of the well. Okay, there's a stone on top of the well. There's a stone on top of the well that's preventing the 3 shepherds from giving their flocks to drink. What's going on over here? What was the process? What would happen every day where Yaakov now chanced upon this scene? All the herds would gather there. The Torah is now telling us, describing us, what was the regular procedure that happened regularly. All the herds would gather there, and they would roll the stone from the mouth of the well, from upon the mouth of the well, and they would give drink the flock, and they would return the stone to the mouth of the well to its place. So essentially, what's happening here is they're waiting for everyone to gather, because it's a huge stone. 3 people, it's too big for 3 people to roll off the well. So what they're doing is, why don't they just leave the well uncovered? We'll see. But essentially, they need everyone to get together, roll the stone off the well together with their combined strength, give all the flocks to drink. And once the flocks are finished drinking, then these 10 shepherds are going to come and roll the stone back on top of the well and put it back in its place. So we're now going to read some of the commentaries, and we're actually going to go in order. And the fascinating thing about Torah, which I'm sure you've come in contact with from every time you learn the Parasha with a rabbi or with anyone else, is that there's many, many layers of meaning in Torah. Torah is never just describing just a physical scene. There's always the psychological meaning and the philosophical meaning and the Kabbalistic meaning and the deeper, the spiritual meaning. There's everything is a parable upon a parable upon a parable. A well is never only just a well. A stone is never just a stone. A sheep is not just a sheep. Everything is many, many layers of meaning. But we'll take it one step at a time. First, we want to understand the practicalities. What's going on over here? What's the story? What's the narrative? So now we have a Radak. Radak was Rabbi David Kimchi. He lived in the 12th century. He was one of the founders of the discipline of Hebrew grammar. He was the one who systemized Hebrew grammar. He was the one who studied. He wasn't the first. Well, those who came before him, several hundreds of years before him, starting from the 8th and 9th century, we find the systematic organization of taking the Hebrew language and identifying all the rules of grammar, and obviously that helps you understand the Torah, because if you understand the Hebrew rules of grammar and you understand exactly how the words are formed and the conjugation of the words, then you can discover, then you can resolve questions, then you can discover what this verse really means. So Radak was not the first. He follows 200 or 300 years of this activity, but he was the most important one. He's considered the number one authority on biblical Hebrew grammar, but he wasn't just a grammarian. He also gave very original and interesting explanations of the text on many different levels. He would give a practical explanation of the text. He would give also a more psychological explanation of the text, and so on. So Radak here is explaining what's going on over here. What is this well? The well was the only source of water for the entire city. Okay? And this was their method of regulating the efficient use of its water. So today you'll have, a pumping station with a big lock on it, and there's the guy who's in charge from the municipality to make sure to regulate the use of water. Nobody takes too much water, because if one greedy person is going to take too much water, then there's not going to be any water left for everyone else. So this was their system. They had a system. They didn't have the mechanisms we have today. They had a big rock. That was their technology. So if the well was the only source of water for the entire city, and this was their method of regulating the efficient use of his water. If each shepherd would draw water at a different time, like I said before, why don't you just leave the well open? You don't want dust to come in, so cover it with a tarp. You don't have to cover it with a 1,000-pound stone, right? So what happened was if each shepherd would draw water at a different time, the water remaining in the throw would be wasted, because the sheep will readily drink only freshly drawn water. So it's a very interesting explanation, because you think, okay, maybe it'll take too much water. No, that's not the problem. What are they going to do with extra water? The sheep are only going to drink as much as they drink. They're not going to drink more than they need. Sheep are not humans. Humans eat too much, right? That's our big problem. We eat too much, and we need diets, and we need all kinds of chemicals, to Zempic and shots. And a sheep, you ever see a cow on a diet? No, a sheep doesn't eat too much. A sheep drinks whatever it needs. But the problem is that sheep are very fussy. They're fussy animals. They won't drink stale water. They need fresh water from the well. So if your shepherd is going to come, the shepherd isn't thinking about everyone else. He's just going to fill up the throw with water. He's going to pump all the water there. His sheep are going to drink. The water is just going to stay there. And the next sheep coming won't drink it. The next shepherd is going to have to pump the water for the sheep. And that's going to be a waste of water. And once there's a waste of water, there's not going to be enough water for people. So that means they all have to drink at the same time. Everyone comes together, everyone pumps the water together, everyone drinks together. Oh, but how do you enforce something like that? I want to go home. I got here early. I want to leave early. I'm not so concerned about what's going to happen to the other guy. I'm not thinking what's going to happen tomorrow when there's not enough water. So this was their way of regulating it. So they placed a heavy stone on the well, which could be moved only with the combined strength of all the shepherds. So now we have a stone that's so heavy that you need 10 shepherds, as we're going to see. The full number was 10. You need 10 shepherds to roll off the stone. Yaakov arrived. So far, 3 shepherds are there. The other 7 still didn't come yet. So they're sitting and waiting for them. Okay. So that's the practical explanation by the Radak. Now the Midrash and Nachmanides, I'm sure you've all heard of Nachmanides, Rabbi Nachman. I'm not going to give you a whole biography for him. You can look it up in the back. they're saying the Torah is not going to give, just to set up the scene, as we're going to see. This is the scene of Yaakov meeting Rachel, right? We're just setting up the drama over here. But if that was the only purpose of this discussion, the Torah would not go into such elaborate detail. There's a field, there's a stone in the middle of the field. Who cares if the well is in the middle of the field, or the well is in the side of the field? Who cares if there's a stone on top of the well, or there's a log on top of the well? Who cares if there were three flocks of sheep, or 4 flocks of sheep, or 2 flocks of sheep? Why is this significant? So the Midrash says this is all alluding to deeper truths. This is all a parable as well. There's a famous rule that says there's no every verse has its literal meaning, but it also has a metaphorical meaning. So what does the Midrash say, and what does the Ramban bring this Midrash? The well in the field is the holy temple. So you have the field is the world, but the field needs water, needs a source of nourishment. What is the source of nourishment for the world? That's the holy temple. The holy temple is a well. Back in last week's Parsha, we talk about the 3 different wells that Yitzchak dug and how the Philistines came and stuffed the wells also. That same, Nachmanides uses the same parable over there where he says these are the 3 holy temples and what happened to each one. He makes a fascinating historical analysis. A well represents the holy temple because just like a well is you have to draw and you bring forth life-giving water. The same thing is the well, the holy temple is a source of spiritual nurture and nourishment for the entire world. What are the 3 flocks of sheep? 3 flocks of sheep are the masses who would converge there during the 3 pilgrimage festivals of Passover, Shavuos, and Sukkot. You have 3 times a year that all the Jews would come to the temple, and that's where they got their spiritual nourishment. That would sustain them throughout the rest of the year. They would go back home, come back with that spiritual nurture that they got at the holy temple. So this was the 3 things. Because from that well they give drink the herds, from there they would draw Ruach HaKodesh, divine inspiration, for the entire year. Okay? So they would withdraw this divine inspiration from the Holy Temple all year. That's what Midrash says, Nachmanides says. But then we have the Tzemach Tzedek. The Tzemach Tzedek was the 3rd Lubavitcher Rebbe, grandson of the author of the Tanya. And he says, okay, very nice. The Holy Temple was a source of spiritual nourishment. What does it mean for me today? I mean, I want the Holy Temple to be rebuilt tomorrow, but until it's rebuilt, what does it tell me? What does it mean in my life? So he gives us an updated version of the parable. He says, the well in the field is the soul's passion and desire for God. We all have a well. Every single person has in their own heart, they have a well from which they can draw passion and desire for God. But there's a problem. The stone is large upon the mouth of the well. This is the material self, which the prophet Ezekiel calls the heart of stone in your flesh. So we have sometimes there's a stone. The stone is the heart of stone. There's our obtuse nature that is blocking, that is cutting off access from our own well of spirituality. We have our own. We don't have to go anywhere else for it. The well of spirituality is in our own heart. But sometimes there's a large stone there, the stone of materialism, that's blocking it. The stone is a necessary component of our mission in life. It's not something extra. Just like for these shepherds, it was an important part of the whole system. You need your material self. You need your material resources. You need your material nature. It's all part of our mission in life. Yet it also blocks access to the water so crucial for our spiritual nourishment. So what do? What did they do? They had a well. They had a stone. As you'll notice that what the Tzemach Tzedek is doing here, he's not only sort of updating or modernizing the parable of the Midrash, he's filling in other details. Right? It didn't say what the stone is. It didn't say what does it mean that they will all gather and with their combined efforts, they're going to remove the stone. So you just come there in the middle of the day in any given time, and you try to budge that stone. You can't do that because the stone is very heavy. It's a very heavy stone. So if you just wake up in the middle of the day in a regular, it's 3:15 in the afternoon now, and I want to inspire myself, I want to feel spiritual, and you try moving that stone, it's not going to budge. There's a certain time of the day when all the 10 shepherds get together. They gather together, and with their combined effort, they're able to roll off the stone. There's a time each day when all the flocks gather there and apply their combined strength to roll away the stone. This is the time of prayer, when the 10 powers of the soul converge. Okay? So we all know the idea of davening with a minyan, right? What is davening with a minyan? Davening with a minyan is you need 10 people to create a quorum, to create a community, to pray together. But according to Hasidic teaching, even when a person is praying alone, they also need a minyan. The minyan is the 10 powers of their own soul. There's what's called the 10 spheros. Every person has 10 powers. I'm sure you've had in the Kabbalah classes of the 10 sphirot. There's 3 intellectual powers, 7 emotional powers, and you need the combined strength of all of them. One on its own is in a fragmented life. If you're only using your capacity for love and you're not using your capacity for discipline, you're not going to get anywhere, and vice versa. You're only using your capacity for compassion, but you're not using your capacity for ambition. Or you're only using your capacity for ambition, but you're not using your capacity for communication or for receptiveness. All these different powers, you need them all, because one on its own is not going to get you anywhere. So you have to, all the 10 have to gather. But what happened? What is the scene that Yaakov finds? The scene that Yaakov finds is that there's 3 that come first, and the other 7 are still have to come. And this is Tzemach Tzedek says. You start with the first 3. That's the 3 mind faculties. What's known as, Rabbi, what are the 3 faculties? Chabad, right? Chochmah Bina Das. Those are the first 3. That's the intellectual powers of the soul. It's I'll give you 3 guesses. That Tzemach Tzedek was a Rebbe in which Hasidus? Chabad, exactly. So of course he's going to plug his party, right? So you get together the three mind faculties. You begin the process. That starts the process, because you can't just dive straight into emotion. If you're going to dive straight into emotion, it's going to be a fake emotion. Okay, some people get themselves all riled up. They play some very lively music, or some very sad music, and they get themselves all emotional, and they're ready to roll. But that's a very shallow kind of emotion. The Tzemach Tzedek said is, what's a real emotion? A real emotion starts with the mind, starts by meditating, by thinking. Okay? The 3 mind faculties, which begin the process by meditating on the greatness of God, followed by the 7 emotional faculties. Together they push away the barriers and the obstructions of material life and draw from the soul's vital waters. Then the soul is rolled back to its place until it is again time for prayer. Okay. So, let's do one more piece, which is probably the most interesting. We'll skip a few verses and we'll go to the most interesting part of the story here for many people. Yaakov is sitting there and he's having this conversation with the shepherds, which is itself also given many, many layers. If you read over here, you'll see it's given many, many layers of meaning. The conversation that they have, he asked them where you're from. He says, we're from Haran. He asked him, do you know Lavan? It was Yaakov's uncle. He says, yes, we know him. And then they tell him, here Rachel is coming with the sheep. Rachel is one of the shepherds, one of the 10. Mm-hmm. And she's coming with the sheep of her father, because she herself is a shepherdess as well. And they're still talking, okay, I'm going to skip to verse number 9. Still they were talking with him, and Rachel came with the flock that is her father's, as she was a shepherdess. Okay, verse number 10. And it was when Yaakov saw Rachel, the daughter of Lavan, his mother's brother, and the flock of Lavan, his mother's brother, Yaakov approached, and he rolled a stone from upon the mouth of the well, single-handedly, that took 10 shepherds to do. And he gave drink to the flock of Lavan, his mother's brother. And then after he does this heroic work, Yaakov kissed Rachel, and he lifted his voice and he wept. So, he does 2 things. He kisses her and he weeps. Okay, let's do the commentary on this verse. 29:11. Yaakov kissed Rachel and he lifted his voice and he wept. So it's interesting. The Midrash Rabbah, we knew the Midrash Rabbah already. The Midrash Rabbah doesn't ask why did Yaakov kiss Rachel. Well, that's the question everyone's going to ask right away. What just so he's standing out there, right? And he sees this girl, and it's the first time he sees her in his life, and he goes and he does this heroic act for her. He rolls off the stone single-handedly from the well, and then he kisses her. What? So the Midrash, okay, the Midrash says, goes to the second part of it right away. Why is he crying? Okay, Yaakov kissed Rachel and he lifted his voice and he wept. Why did Yaakov weep upon meeting Rachel? So Midrash gives 3 explanations of why Yaakov is weeping. Okay. First explanation is.
Where do you see he's crying here?
He wept. And Yaakov kissed Rachel and he lifted his voice and he wept.
Wept?
Wept. Vayevk.
But it says like Vayavech. Vayevech.
Vayevk. Vayevk. Hu bacha. No. Vayevk means hu bacha. איך אומרים? וייבק. זה עברית תנ"כית, לא עברית מודרנית. וייבק הוא בכה. Anyway, so one explanation is, and it's very interesting. The most interesting midrashim are the ones that give 3 different explanations, because now you can go ahead and take apart each one of them and discuss each one. What does one say that the other one doesn't, and so on. So the first explanation is because he said when Eliezer came to betroth Rebekah for Yitzchak, okay, many years earlier, as we mentioned, Avram sends Eliezer to find a wife for Yitzchak. This is how Yaakov's parents married. Yitzchak is Yaakov's father, and Rivka is Yaakov's mother. And Avram sends Eliezer to Haran to go ahead and find a wife for Yitzchak. And how does Eliezer come? He comes with 10 camels laden with gifts, with precious precious garments and precious vessels and gold and silver. He brings a huge dowry. He brings 10 camels carrying gifts for the prospective bride. That's how you made a shidduch back then. Maybe it's a quick way to do things. I mean, just get 10 camels, fill it up with gifts, with the most expensive stuff you can get, and that's it. You're done. So he says, when Eliezer came to the Rebekah for Isaac, he came with 10 camels laden with gifts, and I come with not even a single ring or bracelet. He had nothing. He was penniless. And that's why he's crying. And there's an interesting comment in the footnote from Rabbi Yonasan Eibschutz that Yaakov wasn't so concerned about his poverty, but he knew that because he's penniless, he's going to be completely under the control of Lavan. Lavan, his respective father-in-law, which was not the nicest character in the Bible, to say the least. And if he's penniless and all the money is in the hands of Lavan, he knew that he's not going to be in a very good situation here. Another explanation is because he foresaw that he will not be buried together with her. He knew, he looked ahead, and he saw that even though Rachel is his most beloved wife, they will be parted from each other and they won't even be buried together. Mm-hmm. Another explanation, because he saw people whispering to each other about the kiss he gave Rachel. He saw the people are snickering about the kiss, and 3,000 years later, people are still snickering about this kiss. So it bothered him because it was a pure kiss. It was a pure, most pure of intentions, with the most pure love. He knew this is his destined soulmate. He knew this is the person that together they're going to build the people of Israel. But people, of course, were looking at it a little bit differently, and it bothered him, and that's why he wept. Now we'll do one last piece. This is from Reb Shnei Zalman of Liadi, which now takes this whole encounter of Yaakov and Rachel and the weeping and the kiss and everything and turns it into a Kabbalistic formula. When we feel distant from God, what do you do when you feel distant from God? Does anyone have any suggestions?
Try to chase.
Mitzvahs.
You feel distant from God. One of the ways, this is actually a fascinating passage in Alter Rebbe's Tanya, and it's a very long passage. We sort of condensed it here for over here. He talks about all the different things you can do. You can learn Torah, right? Sometimes you're learning Torah, but your mind just it's It's not working. It's just not. It's just not happening. You're stuck in a groove. Your mind is blocked, and it's not going anywhere. So you can start doing mitzvahs, like you said. Sometimes that also is not happening. It's not helping. You can try this, you can try that. The Alter Rebbe goes through many, many different things that a person can do to arouse his feelings for God. And he says sometimes all of these attempts, all of these approaches, all of these actions, they just fall short. They fail. There's one last resort. There's one last thing that you can do.
Cry.
Well, not just cry. There's one last thing you can do. What is that? In other words, what the Alter Rebbe says is sometimes you find yourself in an unfeeling state. You're just sometimes you're just emotionally dried up. Numb, emotionally numb, exactly. And you have to feel compassion for something, but you don't have what to feel compassion for. So the Alter Rebbe says there's one last thing that always works, and that is to feel compassion for your own soul. You might not care about the other guy. You might not even care about God, but you are going to care about your own soul. And what is your own soul? Your own soul is a piece of God that's now locked in this prison of this unfeeling self. Feel compassion for your own soul, and then that'll open things up. Let's read inside. When you feel distant from God, one of the ways to draw near is by arousing our compassion for the godly spark that is our own soul, which has descended from its source. Think about this. Your soul has descended from its source, the infinite source of life, to become imprisoned within the coarseness and the negativity of the material world. This is the inner meaning of the verse, Yaakov kissed Rachel and he lifted up his voice and wept. Yaakov personifies Tiferet. If you know the map of the Sefirot, each sphere is identified with another character. Avraham is Chesed, Yitzchak is Gevurah, okay, and Moshe is Chochmah, and David is Malchus. You have all the different spheros. Each one is identified with a different biblical character, and Yaakov is identified with the sphere of Tiferes. What is the sphere of Tiferes? That is the attribute of compassion. Rachel represents Malchus, the embodiment of the collective soul of Israel. So Rachel, he said, there's a spark of godliness that's trapped inside your own body. That's Rachel. That spark of godliness, which is Rachel, it's the feminine, it's a Shechina, the feminine component of the divine. That's Rachel. And your feelings of compassion, that's Yaakov. You have to arouse the compassion that you are naturally going to feel for your own soul. The Yaakov and Rachel. Rachel represents Malchus, the embodiment of the collective soul of Israel. The heavenly compassion is aroused for the exiled soul to reunite with its source. Once you arouse that compassion, then comes the kiss and the embrace. The reunion is actualized with a kiss and with an embrace. What is the kiss? The kiss being the divine words of Torah, articulated by our lips. The embrace being the divine actions of the mitzvos and acted by our limbs. So you arouse the compassion that you have for your own soul. That's Yaakov being roused with desire for Rachel, and then you follow that up with a kiss, which is the learning Torah, and the embrace, which is doing the mitzvahs. So the Shnei Zalman of Liadi took this biblical scene and he turned it into a Kabbalistic parable. All right, we'll stop here.
Sure.
And there's a lot more to explain.
Thank you.
Okay.
The annotation gets better and better with each chapter.